In this video and the next couple of videos that are part of this playlist, we'll be solving some interview questions. The language of choice would be JavaScript, but these questions could actually be solved using other programming languages. Our first question is from HackerRank, and it is an array question. You could take a moment to go over the problem before we get started. The expectation for this is to rotate an array n number of times to the left, and we have a couple of examples to get started with. Based on the problem, we have a rot left function on the left which has two parameters, a and d, and according to the description, a represents an array of integers and d represents an integer, which is the number of rotations we're expected to do. Before coding out the solution, it is important for us to take a moment to go over the problem definition and have a better understanding of the expectation. It's also helpful to go over the sample inputs and sample outputs together with the explanations added. Here we have a sample inputs 5 and 4. 5 represents the number of the length of the array, which in this case would be a, represented by a, and d, which is the number of rotations to the left we're expected to do, is represented by 4. So in this case, we are presented with an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is represented by the parameter a, and we're expected to perform 4 rotations to the left, which is represented here by the parameter d. A sample output after the rotation would be 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Breaking this down a bit, I would comment out the step-by-step implementation. In this case, we have a sample array which contains the numbers elements 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the expectation is for us to rotate this d number of times, which in this case is 4. This would mean for our first rotation, after our first rotation, we would have an array 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1. By first rotation here, it means that we're taking the first element in the array and appending it to the back of the array. After the second rotation, the array would be in this case taken 2 and appending to the back of the array, which would be 3, 4, 5, 1, and 2. This is for the second rotation. The third rotation would be taking 3 and appending to the back of the array, which in this case would be 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. And the fourth rotation would be 5, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is a sample input and the expected sample output. So this is the expected return value from rotating the array specified here. Now we have a better understanding of the expectation. Let's get started coding this out. So to start, we would create a shallow copy of the array that is supplied. We could call the variable inputs array, and using the JavaScript array slice method, we create a shallow copy of the array. Using the JavaScript for loop, we would perform the rotation. So we have a for loop, we have an internal variable called I, which we're given a default, which are given a value of 0, and the loop is expected to run from I to less than D, and at each iteration we increment I by 1. We would have a temporary value which holds the first element of the array while we are performing the shift operation. So we could call this value, this variable temp, and assign it the first element from the array. And to get the first element, we would use the JavaScript shift method, which basically returns the first element in the array, and we append that to the back of the array using JavaScript push. This for loop is going to run until the condition I less than D is false, and at each iteration we would take the first element of the array, store it in the variable temp, and push it to the end of the input array. And after the iteration is completed, we would return the input array. Let's test out our implementation. So we have 3 test cases passing, which is great, but we would submit the code to run the implementation across a lot more test cases. It's understandable that in an interview setting, you might not be able to come up with the most optimal solution, but it's important to walk your interviewer through your thought process, and as you're coming up with the solution, you could make it an interactive session where you talk about some assumptions that you might be making or some limitations that your code might have, but making the interviewer aware that you are taking those into consideration, but you're focusing on getting the code to run.